Hi, okay, here's the explanation for yesterday's target, the 26th of Jan, 2026. Here's the final code basically. I'll do the same thing as last time. I'll start off going the most verbose as possible, and then break it down from there. So instead of typing this all out to begin with, I'll just show you basically what the expanded version of this is. So we've got an image tag and a paragraph tag, and then we also use the HTML and body tags to create the other shapes. So initially looking at this, I see two shapes here. We have, let me just put this off. We've got this shape, which I see as a single element with a border on the left, right, and bottom. So that's the HTML, that's the body, and then we need two other elements to do the same thing. Because we give neither of these elements a height, the left and right borders basically don't show up, and you only have the bottom border, which gives it that height basically. Just uses the height of the bottom border. So yeah, so first the HTML element, that's where I'd start. Well, give every element here with the universal selector a solid border with the blue color, and then define a border width. So we don't want any border at the top, and on right, so top, right, bottom, and left, right, bottom, and left all get 30 pixels. And then we use some positioning, we use a margin on the HTML element to give it its position. To show you that, you can just go display none. That's just the HTML element making that first shape. Exact same rules for the body element, except we use a different margin value to position it. We give it that background color, the light background color. And then for our first additional element over here, I use an image tag. Reason being is the image tag is the shortest HTML element that has a default display of inline block. And that makes it useful because it behaves inline in the sense that it can be stacked horizontally as part of the normal flow, like say a span would, for example, to behave the same way. But it also has block. It also has block type display, which means that we can give it a border and we can give it height and padding and so on and so forth. So I'm going to show display. So if we look at this, let's see if this is helpful. Behaves like an inline element in terms of its flow with surrounding content. Yeah, exactly. So that's why it's useful for stacking things horizontally. These elements need to be next to each other, not one below the other. And if they were both block level elements, one would have to be below the other one. Right, so let's just go back here, but also like a block element in terms of its inner layout and box model properties, exactly. So you can place it next to other elements on the same line. And still set its width and height. So that wouldn't work with say like a link tag with an A tag. So that's why I use an image element over here. So yeah, there we have the image. Use some positioning over here, and then use margining for positioning again, and then one could use an image element again over here. You would need to change the select, obviously. That would work as well, but because we have one inline element, we can use a paragraph tag, which is a block level element, and that's obviously shorter. That's a bit better for our use case, less characters. Okay, now I'm just going to go through the optimization. I'll first take out I've added these colors to make it easier to see which is which. So yeah, we start off like this. We can remove the closing tags. You can also remove pixels from a lot of properties. Border width is one of them. Especially the older properties, CSS properties, the browser allows you to omit the unit. So we don't have to add the px unit. We can just basically delete all of those. Alright, and that gives us the same thing. Next, what we can do is change our selectors. So instead of HTML, we can do and with body, we could do this. That would work for now. Image and then p tag. So the way that this flows, we're going to use CSS nesting for this again. So this targets everything, and that we can use this basically to give the body element, the HTML element, its margin for its positioning, because we don't need that selector. And then we're going to use nesting because that's a way quicker way to target consecutive elements. So we remove that, so we essentially have, like, that's what it would look like if it was nested. And then we don't need that, we can just do, so basically all elements inside the HTML element will get that margin and that background color. Okay, and then same thing over here. So instead of image, we can just do another universal selector that's obviously shorter than typing out image. And then for the p tag, that's already a single like selector, so we don't actually have to use nesting or anything like that. Another nice thing about using the p tag. So, and it's got a higher selector specificity than the universal selector, so it doesn't matter that we have margin following these. The universal selector is kind of the lowest specificity, so we don't need to position it anywhere else. The next thing we can do is, instead of using border solid and then giving it a border width, a much quicker way to do this is to just say all the sizes, the width of all borders is 30 pixels, and then we just change border top to 0. That's less characters, right? Another useful trick here is there's a tool called Color Mixer, which I'll link in the description. But basically, it's something someone has written that lets you find the shorter hex code for a color using alpha. So instead of having a 6-digit hex code like this, we'd basically calculate using this what the shortest hex code is. So you would use a 3-digit hex code with an alpha channel, with an alpha value. So this makes it quite easy. We know that our background is white by default. It's always white by default. And then we just copy and paste in this target. So this is what we want to achieve, and this is the background color. That means instead of typing in that, we can use one of these codes. So this is the color. Expanded, this would be 775522 and then 33 being the alpha channel. So I basically just select the shorter one there. So we could do, sometimes the first one doesn't work for some reason. I'm not sure about that, why that works. So then you would just have to play with the next one. I see I used that value, so we would go, choose that one, and that would give us the same end result. Right. Another thing we can do here is change this unit. So there's also a useful tool called Unit Golf, which I've mentioned before, but I'll link it in the description. And then basically we just put in the size that we want. So we want to achieve 30 pixels, and it'll tell us the shortest other unit to get there. So it's telling us there's only 30 pixels, but we can kind of try do one of these values. That's a little bit off. It's 0.04 pixels off, but we can get away with that. So I would then make it 32 cube. So we can try that. And that gives us, that's close enough to 30 pixels that we can use that value. That knocks off another character. Another thing we can do then is, I think from here, remove the spaces. If we don't need any new lines. We can delete all that. Probably delete all of the spaces that we don't need. Anything before, select that. Remove those. Take out all that, and then remove any closing braces or closing semicolons. And let's just make sure we don't have any more. Remove those spaces. We can also remove the space before a hex code, because the browser kind of knows that this is a keyword and this is a value, so it knows to separate those basically. Okay, we've got closing semicolon here. We can remove any of these values, like before the minus, we can remove as well. Okay, then we got down to 154. There's still quite a bit of optimization we can do here. So something I discovered just really by accident over here. So this margin is for the image tag. But while I was doing this, I realized that before I added this margin, it kind of positioned the image tag already as is. If I just show you here, kind of this margin that's being used in the body works perfectly well for the image tag as well. So we really don't need to specify a margin for the image. And then for the paragraph, okay, now this value is kind of off. It's too high over here. So we'll make the top value just 0. And there we go, that's positioned correctly. Got a little bit of repetition here. So obviously the shorthand is top, right, bottom, left. Because the top and the bottom is the same and the right and left is the same, we can just shorten this. So that basically works out to the same thing. Top and bottom value 0, left and right value is 150 pixels. Okay, there we're already off to 127 characters. The last bit of optimization we can do is change this to a percentage value. Percentage is useful because you don't need a space. There's no space necessary like here. And then we can change this. I usually just play with the value till we get something correct. So there, 30%. I think that's the most that we've optimized. Right. This was pretty tight, but when I looked at the other top solutions, I realized that there's actually a way better way to do this. Instead of having elements next to each other, the issue with that being is if you have elements next to each other, you need to have a left and a right value. But if you have all of the elements centered, essentially, or the HTML and the body element centered, I'll just take this out to show you what I mean. Take that out, and let's just hide the body. Let's just hide the body for now. So there. The HTML element just has margin top and bottom of 50, and then left and right 120. So then we don't have to put 4 values here, which is really helpful. So we've got that, and then the HTML element is basically just inside that. So that makes up that middle part. And a handy trick here that works with inline elements. So firstly, this would give us the first value that we want, the first position that we want of the image element. Okay. But if you have two next to each other, you would normally need to add a margin for this value, for this body element as well. And you'd have to do something like that. But there's a nice trick that you can do where you give the right value for the margin a negative, and then we give the left value that like a higher value over here. So that's kind of, if you just increase the negative value here, you can basically do one margin rule to position both image elements, which is really useful. So basically, I'll show you here. So that's the first image element is positioned over there, and then the second element, the margin is used to position it all the way to the left. So that's a really handy way to do this. And then let's see, I think that was the furthest optimization. That was the shortest amount of characters. Yeah, that's all for today, folks.